for today's class, we'll be looking at style and clarity in writing. When we talk about style in professional writing, the style is always formal. So there is two parts to today's lecture. The first one is, of course, looking at the aspects of formality, and the second part is looking at tone of formal writing, okay, or tone in formal writing. We are going to first discuss the aspects of formality. Before we approach the methods, the strategies, the techniques or the guidelines that's involved or that one must follow to make your writing professional, to make your writing style formal in nature, it is useful for us to look at what formal and informal refers to. What is the meaning of formal style and informal style? They're very simple. In what you see on your screen, you have 3 points under each of the styles for formal and informal. They sufficiently describe and elaborate to you what we understand by formal and informal. For example, look at the first point under the formal style. It says less personal, and under the informal style it says more casual and spontaneous, right? So one is less personal and the other is more casual and spontaneous. Now look carefully at the first point, less personal. It does not say impersonal, it does not tells you completely depersonalized, right? It says less personal. So keep this in mind. When we talk about the aspects of formality, we talk about a range of formality. It is not black and white. Of course, formality is not black and white. It's not formal and informal all the time. In fact, in reality, when we talk about formality, we are referring to a range of them, which means it can range from less formal to more formal. And that is how real life situations work. To give you an example of what less formal or less personal in this situation means is, like the first point says less personal. What does that mean? We all write emails, right? And emails over the years have now become a very important medium of professional communication at workplace or even otherwise. It has transformed itself into a medium that is used by all professionals from all the fields to communicate at their workplace, right? So if you look at the structure of email, if you have ever written an email, if you know what an email is, we know that depersonalizing email becomes a very difficult task. Usually email is a one-on-one communication or a one-to-many communication. In either case, it is mostly a form of personal communication. So removing all elements of personal tones from an email is an impossible task, which is why it has to be kept personal, yet it should not become too depersonalized. It should not become too personalized, or it should not become personalized to the extent where it sounds informal, it sounds indecent or impolite, okay, or not suitable for a professional domain. So less personal is the key word here, not impersonal, okay. Now the second one says used for professional or academic purposes, and the other column under informal style, that column says used to write to friends and relatives. That does not require any explanation. You understand that very well. But what does this mean? Used for professional or academic purposes. The underlying meaning or the implication here is that formal style of language is basically used when the purpose is particularly or specifically defined to you. When you know the purpose, when it is defined clearly to you, the style of language that you adopt has to be formal style. Or rather the other way around, formal style is used, or you will find any piece of write-up in a formal style when the purpose of that particular document or a particular write-up or writing is clearly defined to the author, right? The third point under that is about tone. So for our purpose, for professional writing, the tone should be objective in nature, right? There are other tones. You might have heard about people talking about ironic tone, okay, or emotional tone or intellectual tone. The one that we use for professional writing is going to be objective tone. What is objective tone? We are going to talk about it very soon in the same video, in the same class. I will discuss with you how can you write using an objective tone. Right? Now, what is the opposite to this? What happens in the informal style? It uses an emotional tone. Okay, so which means emotional tone is not to talk about the objective tone. Then the first point will be that in professional writing, your write-up should not be or your writing should not have emotional tones. Okay, so these are the basics, the basic features or the basic understanding of what formal and informal is this. Okay, we'll move ahead and look at the remaining part. What makes language formal? Three important factors that decide the formality of written work are specialized situations, audience expectations, and purpose, right? Specialized situations. So, I talked to you about the range of formality. So, like in email, if I'm to talk about the style to be used, the formality to be used, you know, it is less formal. It is not impersonal but less formal. However, if you're writing, say, an application to a university, right, you're submitting an application to a university, or you're suppose submitting a job application form, they will be definitely more formal in nature than your email, right? Or a report that you submit to your authority is going to be more formal. So the language and style that you use in it is going to remain more formal than the one that you would use for an email, which is a form of personal communication, right? Even within the personal communication, you have different ranges. A text message that is sent to your friend is different from the message that you send to your boss, right? Or a text message sent to the boss is a little different from the email that you send to the same person, right? So, medium 2 decides what sort of style or what sort of language suits, or within the range of formality, the medium can decide which range or which point of the range in the formality suits better for each of the medium, right? So, specialized situations then refers to both medium as well as the domain. And then the second one is audience expectations. So, the audience could expect differently from you based on, again, the medium that you're using to communicate. Now, the third one is, again, needless to mention, the purpose, right? Purpose is everything in professional writing. Professional communication, or not just in professional writing, generally in professional communication, purpose is of utmost importance. It has the power to decide everything else that is associated with professional communication. Okay, right. Now, what are the factors that can make your language informal? This is very, very important. Okay, just knowing what makes it formal is not enough. To write efficiently, to write effectively, to write impactfully, it is also very, very important that we know what is not allowed, okay, or what is informal or what should be avoided. Now, you have a list of things right in front of you to know what can make your language informal. The first one in that, group jargons. Okay, what is group jargon, or what are group jargons? Any in-group specialized language. Okay, any in-group specialized language. Now, this can vary. Now, as the name suggests, this is a group language, right? So, as the group varies, the terms, the phrases, the sentences, okay, all of them can differ from one group to the other. To give you a quick example, if you are a student at IIT Madras and you are organizing events such as Shastra or Sarang, which are cultural and technical festivals in IIT Madras, you would see a lot of terms that are used among students here to refer to various designations allotted to them for each of this fest, right? So, that includes CODs, okay, super CODs. So, CODs is basically coordinators, super CODs is super coordinator, or you have something like an FR team. If you are not a part of the group, if you are not a part of the group that is IIT Madras, not part of the student group community here, this particular language is not accessible to you, right? You do not understand. If somebody says the FR team, somebody says, please talk to the COD, you do not understand what that means, right? So, why is it so? It's not because you don't understand the language. This is a specialized language, right? So, this is a in-group language that people use to address each other or to talk about a certain situation, which is more specific and which is particular to their community, right? The group that they belong to. So, these kind of terms and words are referred to as group jargons, right? In formal writing or in professional writing, one should not use group jargons, okay? Now, the second one under that, this is something that is common to all of us. We all use slangs, idiomatic expressions, colloquialisms, right? local, words that are quite locally situated, okay, something that is not accessible even to say somebody from the next, say from the next district, right? It is too localized for them to understand. So, say examples of dialects, these words are then specific to that particular language, right? In this case, English, which is why we call them idiomatic expressions in English, okay? Our languages have idiomatic expressions too, okay, which may not be accessible to people of the other, people who speak different languages, a language different than ours, right? So, these sort of usages that are very specific to the language, not just the language, but which is very specific to the culture of the speaker of that particular language, should be avoided in formal writing or professional writing. The point is, one should avoid using any of these slangs or idiomatic expressions in the professional domain, right? Because it is written for a wider audience, it is documented, and you do not want to include anything that can shroud the meaning, which can create ambiguity to the reader. Third one is very important. It is called the stereotypical and biased language, right? So, you need to understand what stereotyping and bias means. Okay, we'll look at it. You have the categories that can fall prey to stereotype and bias on the screen. What are they? They are gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, disability, sexual orientation, so on and so forth, right? So, you have a few categories here. All of these, okay, all of these categories, often they become prone to what you refer to as bias and stereotypes, okay. So, we need to understand this a little more. This is a vast topic. This is a study by itself. A lot of work has included special topics. You know, they have added separate topics on understanding what stereotypical and biased language means. We'll quickly try to understand what we mean by biased language is, okay. So, say when we talk about gender, okay, so how can you overcome it, right? To give you a quick example, you know, you might have heard people telling you that saying something like a chairman or postman, right, mankind, is sexist, right? It does not. So, why do people say it is sexist? Because it assumes that the person is always a man. So, what can you use instead of mankind? You can say human beings, you can say individuals, you can say persons, right? That makes it sound more neutral, and it also is more inclusive, right? We just talked about gender. So, when you talk about ethnicities or races, try and use the labels or definitions that are formally recognized by both the community as well as the scholarship around that community, right? So, for example, you have, when you talk about race, you can use terms like the South Asians, right, the African Americans, right. Black and white are also very, they are very well recognized these days. So, it is not offensive to use black and white when you refer to race and ethnicity, because there is a whole gamut of scholarship in that field, and it is a very formally very well recognized identity marker these days. So, it's not wrong to use that as well. Similarly, for each of the categories that you see on the screen, whether for socioeconomic status or age or disability or sexual orientation, right, these days a lot of work has happened, a lot of scholarship also exists in the field of LGBTQI, right. So, when you write down, when you write anything, one should be more, you should be sensible and sensitive to these labels. You should be sensitive to the identities of people, and make sure that you do not use false hierarchies when talking about dominance, and stay away from stereotype and avoid bias in language, okay. So, this is about the third point. Now, the next one is first person pronouns. So, when you are writing professionally, when you are writing formally, do not use first person pronouns like I, me, my, we, us. In fact, also do not use the second person you. Okay, so using you or addressing your audience as you makes it thoroughly informal. Now, the last one there is avoid using contractions. Now, so you have on the screen, what is it? I've, I apostrophe VE. Then you have you apostrophe RE, your, okay, not your. The your, 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 and this one you or your is different from each other. This is the contraction or the contrastive form of you are. The first one is the contracted form of I have. So these kind of constructions, the contrastive constructions, must be avoided in the formal writing. Okay, in formal style, one should stay away from these contractions. So these are a few points or few factors that could make your language informal. So keep them in mind. Make it a point to stay away from all of them while you are writing for professional. Okay, so formal writing, it should avoid phrases to ensure clarity, to enhance the clarity of what you write. It should avoid using phrases or sentences that are wordy, 1, 2, cliched and jargonized. Okay, why should you not use them? Why should you not use wordy phrases and sentences or cliches or jargonized phrases? Because they add irrelevant details to the sentences which do not add to the meaning of the sentence at all. Okay, so they sit there in the sentence, they occupy the space, make it wordy, make it lengthy. However, they are irrelevant to the meaning of the sentence. They only add to the length of it. Okay, and take up the space, right? So that is what cluttered phrases do. So any wordy sentence, okay, any wordy sentence or any wordy phrase then will essentially have something like a cluttered phrase. Okay, so you should remove it in order to make it better. Second one is clichés. Clichés, what do we mean by clichés? Clichés are overused expressions. Okay, they are so overused. They were popular. These clichés could have been popular. You know, they could have been popular usages at some point of time, but they are so overused now that now they sound redundant. Whenever people use them in either in speech or in writing, they have a tendency to make the write-up or the speech redundant. Okay, so that is what clichés are. I'll give you examples of all of them. So clichés are overused expressions, right? Now the last one, jargons, not very different from the group jargons that we talked about. Again, jargons are those general inaccessible expressions, and what do? They can make your writing ambiguous, right? If they are inaccessible, obviously it will result in ambiguity, right? So let's look at the examples of this, and then we'll talk about what you can do to avoid jargons and cliches and wordiness, okay? Because that is also important. Just knowing what they are does not help, but one should also know how to avoid them, right? What should we do in order to avoid them? So let's look at examples first then of wordy sentences. You have 3 sentences in front of you. Just look at them. In my personal opinion, the project should be considered for approval. Okay. She has a tendency to become vengeful when opposed. I came to the realization that the office remains open till 8 in the night. Okay. Look at all the 3 of them. Now, the ones that are red fonted, okay, all the expressions that are highlighted in red, okay, these are what are referred to as the wordy patch in a sentence or the cluttered phrase, like the one that you saw in the previous slide, right? So these are examples of all of these in red. Okay, 1, 2, 3. These are what you refer to as cluttered phrases. Okay, or this is what adds to the wordiness of the sentences. Okay, what can you do? Instead of writing in my personal opinion, you can use instead in my opinion. Both of them mean the same. In my opinion, the project should be considered for approval. Okay, instead of writing too many words together, you can just say in my opinion. Similarly, for the second sentence, she has a tendency to become vengeful can be replaced with she becomes vengeful. So see that whole set of words here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 5 of them are replaced with just 1. Use instead becomes vengeful. So she becomes vengeful when opposed instead of using all of those words, right? So you're cutting down, you're decluttering the phrase basically. The last one, I came to the realization that can be very simply put as I realized that, right? I realized that the office remains open till 8 in the night. Okay. So you can have a list of such phrases. You can find them anywhere. The source is, it's all over the internet. You can find them, or as an exercise, what you can do is you can write down something by yourself and check for such phrases which you think are there in your sentence and definitely not adding any meaning to it, it's just occupying space. So just look at those phrases and see if you can cut them down into 1 word or 2 word. You can do this exercise. Okay. Now, next, cliche expressions. Okay, these you might be familiar with a few of them at least. Okay, make no mistake. Okay, it is not rocket science. Agree to disagree. Agree to disagree is a thoroughly overused expression, right? Agree to disagree, or I beg to disagree. That is also another one. It is what it is, or leave no stone unturned. Okay. Last but not the least. Okay. Last but not the least. Okay. This is also like agree to disagree. Another thoroughly overused expression is last but not the least. Okay. So these are all examples of cliche. Keep away from cliches. They don't add any meaning to your whatever you have written. Your sentences would make good meanings. They would produce very good meanings even without the usage of all of them. Okay. And these particularly do not look good in the writing because they are so overused now that they have become trite. Right? People do not, it looks boring, trite and very repetitive in nature, which is a negative thing while you are writing. Right? Now, the last one here is jargon. Okay. Now, about jargon, every discipline has its own jargons, right? So, people who are specialized in a particular discipline, they know there are a few words that they keep using repetitively among themselves, right? So, those are jargons for other people. Okay. Or, you have something called discourse convention, right? So, discourse convention means, every discourse follows certain guidelines, methods, keywords, etc. Within themselves, right? So, this jargons could be something like, jargons can also be discourse conventions, but there are other jargons. There are general jargons which people, casually use while they speak or they write. Even those kind of jargons are problematic. Group jargons are problematic definitely when you're talking to a wider audience, but even general jargons should also be stayed away from. You have examples of general jargons right in front of you. Tip of the iceberg, low hanging fruit, bottom line, big picture. These are all considered jargons because they don't essentially contribute to the meaning of what you are writing. But at the same time, it can create confusions and ambiguity to the readers also. Not everybody would understand this, right? Even if it is a generally used one, people may not understand, or there can be ambiguity because jargons, they can create confusions, okay, because they do not usually have literal meanings. They have metaphorical meanings, and whenever metaphorical language is used, a vast lot of people may not find, they may not relate to what has been said, they may not understand what has been said, right? So, for that reason, even general jargon should be avoided from professional writing. Okay. So, quickly 2 points about how to avoid before we start talking about tone in professional writing, right? In terms of cliche, what you can do to avoid cliche, it usually happens because you are not concentrating well enough on what you're writing, or maybe you have been continuously writing for a long time, right? So, if that is the case, then take a break, okay? Take a break and then come back to your writing. Do not exert yourself too much. Okay, do not spend too much energy writing and don't drain yourself out. Not probably, most of the times that becomes the reason why you start engaging yourself, or you start using cliched expressions, okay, because your brain has stopped thinking. It is now refusing to think about anything new. It is unable to come up with new constructions because it is overworked. So take a break, look at your work afresh. So you'll be able to avoid a lot of cliched expressions. Okay. Same applies to jargons, right? So instead of using jargons, you can sit back, relax, and think of new analogies, new other comparisons that you can use instead of something that looks like a jargon and can create ambiguity. Okay. How do you identify cliche or jargon in what you have written? This is also important. When you're reading, if your eye has a tendency to skip certain phrases or skip certain words while you're reading, then most probably or most often than not, it can be a cliche or a jargon. Okay, your brain is purposefully avoiding it, it is skipping. It's skipping reading it because you do not understand it, okay, because it is not accessible to you, because whatever is accessible to you, you will definitely, you understand it, so you read it. But if you think that it is not accessible to you, you're definitely going to skip it. Quickly talk about tone in professional writing. I just have a few examples for you to understand what tone means, okay. So, I already told you about tone. Tone in formal writing is objective in nature. So, in this particular slide, we are going to look at what does this objective mean? What do we mean when we say you should use objective tone? So, let's quickly look at that. What's the first one? Look at this. Emphasis must be on ideas and things and not on people and feelings, right? So, do not emphasize, while you're writing, do not emphasize on people or their feelings, okay? Instead, what you should do is, you should put your attention, you should put your focus on the ideas itself, the ideas themselves or the things themselves. Look at the example. I think that the argument is valid, right? I think that the argument is valid. What do you want to do? You want to put the emphasis on the idea or the things. So, in order to do that, you have now written the statement. You can rewrite that statement as, these findings indicate that the arguments are valid. Okay, so you removed the personal pronoun I from there, right? So, this also, I told you they feed into each other, right? Tone, style, clarity. So, we already have seen that personal pronouns should be avoided in formal writing. So, instead of saying, I think that the argument is valid, now you have put the emphasis, you have brought back the emphasis on the findings. These findings indicate that the arguments are valid. Okay, not I. These findings indicate that the arguments are valid. That sounds more formal and more professional than saying I. Now, the second one, evaluative words that are suggestive of non-evidence based findings or observations must be avoided. Okay, so do not use expressions which do not agree with technical evidences. Okay, what does that mean? If you think that a piece of work that you have read, or if you think that something is not based on technical judgments, okay, if something is not based on evidence, right, then avoid using evaluative words for them. Third one, very important, avoid intense and emotional expressions. Okay, particularly this is in connection with the previous point that we were talking about. Avoid intense and emotional expressions. So, for example, you are giving review to someone on their writing. Okay, you do not say the writing is terrible or the writing is wonderful. Okay, both of them, both absolute positives and absolute negatives must be avoided when you write. Okay, don't say something like this is terrible or this is wonderful. Instead, you should resort to something that is less personal, something that is more neutral in nature. Like if you want to say that the writing was not really up to the mark, okay, so you can use the writing is less convincing. Instead of saying the writing is terrible, you can say the writing needs improvement, the writing is less convincing. Okay, this can more work could be done on this, right? Or the other way around, if you want to, if you're impressed with what has been presented to you, then you can use expressions like the writing is well argued. Okay, the writing is well put. Instead of saying this is wonderful, this is excellent, you can use more neutral, make more neutral choices like well argued, well put, okay, well researched. Okay, so this is the example of avoiding intense and emotional expressions, the third point. Now, the fourth point here is allowing modalities. Modalities, if you have already come across this word, all right, but if not, what does the word modality means? It refers to various attitudes of the speakers, right? For example, obligation or possibility, right, or ability. So, these are all referred to as modalities, right, and they help you in expressing the attitude, right, and if you're a reader, it helps you understand the attitude of the speaker. So, when you're writing, use modalities to allow room for disagreements. Okay, if you do not write an absolute statement, for example, look at the first one, the policy does not negatively affect any sections of the society, right? This is an absolute statement. Somebody is saying it does not. does not affect anybody in the society. So when you're writing in the professional domain, do not write absolute sentences or sentences that give you a tone of absolutism, right? So do not do that. Instead, you can write a sentence like, there is a possibility. See, look at that, possibility. This is what is called using modality. I have included the modality of possibility in this, right? So there is a possibility that the policy works good for everyone. So what is it with this kind of a sentence? When I say there is a possibility that the policy works good for everyone, I am allowing some room for disagreement to the other person. I am saying there is a possibility. So someone can argue and say that no, that is not the case. There could be this possibility too. It is also possible that it affects negatively, or it does not create a good impact on X society, XYZ section of the society. Okay. So basically, I am allowing some space for them to disagree instead of being an absolutist, right? Saying, no, it does not affect at all. That is not how you write in that's not how you write professionally. Okay, so this is the fourth point under the objective tone. And the last one is use authentic sources for credibility. Whenever you are writing for professional work or professional purposes, make sure that you refer to good books, authors, other works like articles, etc., research papers, and use quotes from them. Okay, quote these authors or quote their works while you're writing in order to enhance your credibility, in order to tell the reader that whatever you have written is well researched and that this is not simply a loose article that you have produced on your own. It is backed with good evidence, and there are well established authors, writers, or organizations that support these claims and have worked on this. Okay, so always bring credible sources, use authentic sources to build your credibility in formal writing, right? Use them and cite them in your work so that your chances of credibility, your writing becomes more trustworthy and more formal in nature. Okay, so this is how you achieve objectivity in tone. When we say objectivity of tone in formal writing, these are what more or less we are referring to. Okay, so I hope you have understood what we discussed in today's class. The first part was about the aspects of formality. Right? We looked at what formal and informal means, and from there on we moved on to the clarity, what roles styles can play in ensuring or hampering clarity, and finally we looked at the tone, which is also like a very important aspect of formal writing, which is the objective tone in this case, and a few points or methods that you can adopt to make your tone objective. That's all for today's class. I will meet you again to discuss the last part, the last element in professional writing very soon. Until then, thank you and see you again.